Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that the agenda be adopted as printed and circulated. Are there any issues with the agenda? All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And are there any declarations of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Not seeing any. And minutes. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that the minutes from the April 19, 2023 council meeting be adopted as printed and circulated. Are there any issues with those minutes? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And by way of explanation for anybody here or online, I'm wearing this horrible shirt today because unfortunately the Trojans lost in the playoffs eventually. After a fantastic run, they did a great job. They gave us all a lot of entertainment and they put up a valiant fight against the Lakeshore Canadiens, but as I said online, the Lakeshore team was the better team. They played better every game. They played solid. The Trojans put up a good fight, but in the end, lost. And a bet is a bet. I got 2 other mayors to wear Trojans shirts in exchange for me having to wear this one shirt, so that's a pretty good deal overall, I think. So that's why I'm wearing this. So I just ask everybody to put up with that for a little while, and then normal business will resume later on. So we have 3 timed items today. Delegation from Oxford County Community Planning on additional residential units at 10 o'clock. A delegation on fee requests at 10:45, and an acknowledgement of an employee at 11:45. So until then, we will dive straight into reports from staff. 8.1 Fire Department Report 2023-054 from the Fire Chief regarding monthly fire report for April 2023. Chief, is there anything you want to highlight for Council?
Good morning. A couple things to highlight. I noted that 5101, which is Tempsford's new pumper rescue, is running ahead of schedule. I've been chatting about that in my reports over the last few months, but we did have the opportunity to go visit it last week and deliver the decals so it can be delivered to Toronto. It's going to be on display at the Ontario Association of Fire Chiefs Conference and Trade Show for the province this weekend, and then it should be to us middle of the month, which is exciting. Our driver training program's up and running. We had our first 2 firefighters complete their testing this week, and we've got 2 more set for the middle of the month. And those were the only highlights this month.
Questions for the Chief on the report? Not seeing any. Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2023-054 from the Fire Chief be received and filed for information purposes only. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thanks, Chief. And 8.2 Recreation Department Report 2023-050 from the Director of Recreation and Facilities regarding monthly departmental activities. Matt, is there anything you want to highlight for Council in that report?
No, there's.
Questions from Council? Councillor Finch.
With the exhaust situation at the Embro booth, what are you doing with the bathrooms for the summer? Are they open 24/7?
So after we had this incident where the bathrooms join or share a wall with the concession, and so they did break in through the ceiling in the washroom area. Following that, we started locking the washrooms after the evening activities for baseball or at dusk when there wasn't baseball activities on. And then we're doing the same thing at South Park in Tempsford, following a bit of vandalism there last year as well.
Any other questions on the report? Councillor Mitchell.
Matt, as the mayor referenced, the Trojans had a good long run, and we agreed to leave the ice in longer than planned to accommodate that. What was the financial impact of that to the township?
We won't have the full financial impact until we get full hydro and utility billings. We typically see that month following, sometimes 2 months after, which is because we're the commercial accounts, they're a little slower to get billing through to us. The hours that are in the spreadsheet here that show 23 hours in the month of April for TDRC is all that's all Trojans. So we have the revenue side, but if I wanted to put farther data together, we'd have to wait till we get those utilities in.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
Any other questions on the report? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2023-050 from the Director of Recreation and Facilities be received and filed for information purposes only. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And item 8.3, Building and Drainage Department, report 2023-058 from the Chief Building Official Drainage Superintendent regarding monthly departmental activities. Mike, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
Nothing at this time.
Questions from council on that report? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2023-058 from the Chief Building Official Drainage Superintendent be received and filed for information purposes only. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 8.4, Public Works Department, report 2023-056 from the Director of Public Works regarding a Public Works monthly departmental report. Steve, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
Not so much highlight. We do have an update to our gravel and dust suppression application. Due to the rain, we've had to push back the dust suppression application. Will be starting on Tuesday of next week. Our plan is still to try to hit Hunt Road or the busy sections first, and then we're going to be starting to go following up on the fresh gravel roads after that. Weather conditions look like they're going to dry up, and we're concerned about dust, especially on the fresh gravel roads, so we're going to start following those roads first and then work our way across township.
Questions from council on the report? Councillor Mitchell.
Steve, a couple months ago you said that you hope when the weather warmed up that you'd be able to move into the ZMF in May, into the shop and the offices, and the weather hasn't warmed up, but is it still your plan to move in the near future?
Yeah, we'd really like to get in there in May. It's going to be late May or early June before we probably realistically we get in there. All we're really waiting for is commissioning of the fire suppression system. The new panel's been installed and it's up and operational. A few deficiency items that have to be cleared up yet, but we're getting really, really close to getting occupancy permit. So we have some office furniture and lunchroom furniture we're waiting on too, so that's a few weeks out. So as soon as we get those items cleared up, we should be able to move in. There should be no issue with that.
Thanks, Steve.
Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Greg.
Not a question, but a comment on the section regarding council tour. I know in the past this was a really helpful tool for council to get out and see these projects and sites firsthand, and especially to have access to staff on site when we were there to ask questions when we were actually looking at it. So the report suggests that if council would be interested, that this could be scheduled at our availability. So I just wanted to express interest in getting this started again. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Well, it's my pleasure. I mean, the department is involved in it in the past, and I think we're going to try to get the fire department involved too. So in this going forward, so it's been 3 years, and there's lots of catching up to do. So it's going to be a full day, but I can't speak for all staff. I'm sure all departments, we enjoyed it when we were doing it before, seeing our, showing council our accomplishments and our future projects planning. So it's kind of nice to update council one-on-one.
Councillor Mitchell, then back to Councillor Deputy Mayor.
I was just going to make a dumb joke, so I was just going to say I'm looking forward to going on another one, because the last time I went, I had a very young baby in a car seat, and you guys had to it really changed the flow of the day, and I appreciated it, but it was pretty stressful. And so I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to do this again and just really take it all in and not have that added task alongside me. That was all I was going to say.
No, it's good, and it's good for new council members that we have now. And seeing some of the assets we talk about in council, such as the Robinson Pit, it's nice to see eyes on that kind of stuff, right? So there's lots of advantages of this tour, and I'm hoping we can get this going early July.
Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I just want to echo Katie's comments and Steve's comments of the value of this tour. For, we talk about all these things over and over again, but they're in a lot of cases abstract things. So to actually get out there and see what we're talking about, it's great value. So, and I think you suggested early July, the first week of July, I think would be ideal if we can line that up and check our schedules and whatever. But
yeah, absolutely. We're open. I think we can just get our calendars together, and we'll figure out a day and nail down a day and get a a ride.
So I don't want to make this bigger than it needs to be, but I almost wonder, like, maybe it would be better than trying to find a day. Maybe we find like a couple of days, because I'm just thinking if we're going to go to some fire halls, maybe we go to rec halls. Wouldn't be a bad thing to throw in at least one drainage stop to look at a drain. You know, maybe we look at 2 days or 3 days over the next, like not necessarily in a row, but over the next months or whatever. I think it's good for us to see them, but I think also in terms of council orientation and stuff, to actually go out and look at those things and spend some time with our staff talking about it. So whatever works, I think like heads are all nodding here. So I think we're kind of open to whatever you all think would be worthwhile to take us out and show us. So I'm confident that with a doodle poll we can find some days to make that work.
100%.
Any other questions on the report? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2023-056 from the Director of Public Works be received and filed for information purposes only. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 8.5 Finance Department, report 2023-057 from the Director of Finance regarding the 2023 tax rates. Diane, is there anything you want to highlight for council in that?
No, nothing else.
Questions from council on the report? Councillor Mitchell.
No questions, but a comment, and I'm glad to see that it actually come in at 4.5% impact as the final taxes. But if you look at the breakdown, I think we kind of got bailed out once again because the county was at 3.3 and education was at less than 1. So that brought our number down, and I know we worked hard to come up with an 8.15, and that was modified some by the development we've had, which I think brought it around a little under 6.5, under 7 anyway, which was in line with inflation and was a responsible budget. But I think fortunately the other two components of this made it look better than it would have been otherwise, and in the future we can't really count on that happening again. So just my comments on it. That in the end it turned out better than it looked 6 months ago.
Any other questions on the report? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that council enact a bylaw to formally adopt the 2023 bylaw for the 2023 tax rates. Any discussion? So I guess my comments just before calling the vote would be that I think, first of all, this little chart, this Appendix B, is awesome. I think it's a great summary for residents to sort of see where we've been, where we're going, what it means. But I think it's a responsible tax increase when we see this. I know a lot of residents are like, why does it have to go up? Well, the cost of everything for the township goes up the same as it does for everybody. The township buys fuel, the township buys groceries, everything, and that's a reality. To some extent, the tax increase is offset by growth. New taxpayers reduce the burden on the current taxpayers, but that's always moderated as well by increased service demands from residents. So I think this is a absolutely responsible tax change, and also to be clear for anybody who's watching this, this is actually formally a decision point for council, but really it's a result of previous decisions by council that end up in this place, which is where this is. So I think it's a good report, and I especially think the communication in this report is excellent. Any other discussion before I call the question? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 8.5B, report 2023-048 from the Director of Finance regarding tile loan application submitted by Matthew Steele and Jessica Stathopoulos for Park Lot 5, Concession 11, EN. And Diane, is there anything you want to highlight for council on that one?
No.
Questions from council? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that council approve the application for tile drain loan of Matthew Steele and Jessica Stathopoulos for a tile drain loan on Part Lot 5, Concession 11, EN, in the Township of Zorra, pending funding from the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And I'm going to suggest that before we move on to corporate services and the strategic planning report, that we will not get done by 10 o'clock, I don't think. I'm going to suggest we take a break and come back just before 10 for Megan's delegation on ARUs, if that's okay with everybody. We'll take a break. Lisa, can you let us know when we're off? Somebody crack a joke or something now. Thank you, Lisa. Back from break, I'll call the meeting back to order, and we are at item 6, public meetings and drainage meetings. And I have a motion moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that this council meeting be adjourned at 10 a.m. for the purposes of holding a public meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Planning Act. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And Megan, I will turn it over to you for your presentation on ARU zone change ZN 5-23-04 Township of Zorra.
Okay. Good morning. Your agenda contains draft zoning bylaw provisions to implement official plan policies regarding additional residential units, or ARUs. The policies were adopted by County Council on February 8th, 2023. And just to give some background, I'll just slide that. The province has directed municipalities to permit up to 2 ARUs per residential lot in settlements that have both municipal water and sewage services. And both units can be within the principal dwelling, or you could have one in the principal dwelling and one in a detached structure, for a total of 3 units per lot. The Planning Act and regulations provide some limitations to what municipalities can require for these units. You can't require more than 1 parking space or a minimum unit size. Can't specify the relationship of the occupant to the property owner, or the date of construction of the principal dwelling. The overall provincial direction is to allow ARU as of right as much as possible, which would be no planning process, just a building permit. But it's understood that reasonable standards and requirements can still be established by municipalities to ensure that there's adequate functionality and servicing capacity and things like that. Since Bill 23 was passed last November, there's no longer a requirement for municipalities to enact policies and zoning to authorize ARUs within unserviced areas. However, it was clear from our previous consultation that there is a desire from the public and councils to permit ARUs outside of service settlements where appropriate. So the county official plan policies that apply to unserviced villages, hamlets, rural residential lots, and farms do enable townships to permit ARUs. Next one. So the report provides a summary of the proposed zoning provisions. We acknowledge that the zoning bylaw itself, or the draft zoning bylaw itself, is quite long. There are various amendments required to each section of the bylaw to fit new provisions into the existing structure, and some minor housekeeping was also required. We've moved to an index rather than numbered definitions, which took up a couple pages. So the main ARU provisions are proposed in the general provisions, which is section 5 of the zoning bylaw, and pages 4 to 7 of the draft bylaw. One definition to highlight is just defining what an ARU is, and it's based on the definition that's in the official plan. The key points are that ARUs can be within a principal dwelling, which is defined as a single detached dwelling, semi-detached dwelling, or street townhouse, or in a detached structure on the same lot, and that additional units are secondary and subordinate to the principal dwelling. So for serviced villages, the official plan policies require that the zoning permit up to 2 ARUs per lot in the combinations that I mentioned earlier, provided adequate servicing capacity exists. And so in Zorra, this corresponds to the R1, R2, R3, V, and CC zones. In the central commercial zone, the draft zoning provisions are proposing that up to 2 ARUs be permitted in Thamesford, but in Embro, Public Works has indicated that there are servicing constraints and that only 1 ARU should be permitted. And then in the central commercial area, we've proposed that it's intended to be primarily a commercial area, so we've proposed to limit ARUs to lots with an existing single detached dwelling to discourage building new single detached dwellings and putting units in them. Okay, got the next. In settlements without municipal sewage system, the official plan policies enable one ARU per lot, either within the principal dwelling or in a detached structure. The policies require a minimum lot area of 0.6 hectares, or 1.5 acres, for a unit in a detached structure. And that was just to ensure that there's adequate space for second or upgraded septic system. The minimum lot size was included in the OP policies due to the provincial policy statement directing municipalities to consider long-term impacts of development that is served by private services, and because adverse environmental health conditions could result from a concentration of a number of septic systems in an area. The minimum is based on our previous advice from public health and our existing lot standards, provincial standards, and input from the building officials. However, we did indicate through the consultation on the official plan policies that staff intend to do a comprehensive review of the lot area standards across the county. So that's within our current work plan for official plan updates to make sure that we're meeting provincial standards and setting a reasonable standard. Outside settlements, the policies enable townships to permit up to 2 ARUs per lot. For ARUs in attached structure, there's the minimum lot area, and where a lot contains more than one accessory structure, so on a farm where they have two or more houses for farm help, still only 2 ARUs per farm would be permitted. And an ARU in a detached structure on an agricultural property is also subject to approval from the Committee of Adjustment, and that was just to ensure the locational criteria are met and that impacts to agricultural land and operations don't occur. So then the criteria that apply to all ARUs, ARUs must be clearly secondary to the principal dwelling. So the policies limit the cumulative gross floor area to 50% of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling on the lot, to a maximum of 100 meters squared within a settlement and 140 meters squared outside of a settlement. And the policies represent a minimum standard, so the townships could reduce the size of the units or the number of units permitted in these areas, like outside of service settlements. This hasn't been proposed in the draft, but something to consider. We've put in a minimum access for occupants through a minimum required walkway, clear of encroachments, a minimum parking space of a requirement of 1 space per unit. There would still be, the principal dwelling would still be subject to whatever requirement is for that type of use. So for a single detached dwelling, it's 2 spaces. And the spaces can be in tandem, but cannot be inside an enclosed garage for the ARU. For the principal dwelling, that would be fine. And then some minimum landscaped open space requirements. And there's already existing minimum landscaped open space requirements, but they deal with the entire lot. This is a minimum landscape open space requirement for in the rear yard to provide functional amenity space for the occupants of of both the principal and the ARUs. The requirements for an ARU in a detached structure. The structure should be located to the rear in the rear yard or the interior side yard, except on farms. There's minimum side and rear yards, and building height are articulated in the requirements for accessory buildings already, so we've just applied those same standards. There's a maximum 40-meter setback to facilitate emergency response. This is just in the settlements as well, just to make sure there's the detached unit doesn't end up too far back. To avoid impacts to agricultural operations on the farm or nearby farms, a maximum distance of 30 meters from the principal dwelling on a farm has been applied, and that's in the policies as well. And the location of the detached structure shall comply with the minimum distance separation formula from livestock structures. And then further, to minimize potential impacts on adjacent properties within settlements, there's a minimum fencing requirement that no windows above the ground floor be allowed in an interior side yard or rear yard, and no upper level balconies, decks, or rooftop patios. in the settlement areas. And then some other matters. There's the existing converted dwellings have changed to be up to 4 units and only permitted in the R3 zone. And we've removed them from the agribusiness, institutional, and recreational zones, as those were residential units are only permitted as an accessory to those two commercial uses and institutional uses in those cases, and we didn't feel intensifying them further through adding ARUs was appropriate. Other definitions and minor housekeeping, we have updated the definitions of servicing, so municipal water, sewage, private water, sewage. The definition for natural hazards based on some comments from the Conservation Authority, and all those match up with the official plan and the provincial policy statement. This was an item that was on the housekeeping list for a while, was to permit residential dwellings in a basement or cellar, as the building code requirements mostly dictate how those can be done safely. So we've put that in because it will facilitate a number of these units. We've limited the home occupations to only within a principal dwelling, and that home daycares and bed and breakfasts only not be permitted on the same lot as an ARU, converted dwelling or garden suite within a settlement, just to deal with parking and traffic, some of those kind of potential issues. And we've revised the garden suite provisions to allow units to remain up for up to 20 years, as this is the current provisions in the Planning Act. And yes, I pointed that out earlier, that the garden suite option still does remain for people that want to go through the zone change process and have a temporary building instead of a permanent ARU. So overall, the proposed zoning is intended to implement the official plan policies and current provincial direction, but also establish requirements for ARUs to ensure compatibility, functionality, and adequate servicing. The zoning provisions do apply broadly, so it's anticipated that some minor variances will result. Staff will monitor the number and nature of these minor variances to determine whether future changes are appropriate. One of the recommendations of the report are that the township consider other local implementation measures, such as licensing or registration, if that's deemed to be appropriate. We also recommend that the building permit application materials and forms and checklists be revised to include checking servicing capacity with County Public Works as early as possible in the process, so that people don't get too far along and then find out that they aren't eligible. And then planning staff is also working on some general information sheets for the public and for staff to ease with interpretation and standard report template wording, those kinds of things. And thank you for giving me the chance to go over this, and I'm pleased to answer any questions.
Thanks, Megan. Questions from council on their presentation? Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I think just maybe to clarify, that the thing that sticks out for me is this servicing aspect, which is more of a county issue anyways, but in the summary here, we're talking about Tempsford having up to 2 ARUs, Embro as 1, but in the recommendations we're talking that we need to look at this closer when it comes to servicing, and you mentioned in the building permit process we should be checking whether servicing is available. How are we coming up with that 2 and 1 number to start with, even as a baseline?
Through the mayor to the question. Well, we've been advised by County Public Works that that's the constraints that exist in those communities. For Embro, they are, I think, also going to have like a unit cap that they'll have internally for when they review the capacity, when people request whether there's capacity available. And, hopefully if there's any future review of these zoning bylaw provisions, and there's no capacity left, we would just say there's no capacity left, and we change the zoning at that point. But
So it could potentially be, let's just say in the case of Tempsford, I'm just trying to understand how this has been assessed. if everyone were to take advantage and have two, has it been assessed that way, or is it based on an assumed percentage of people that may explore this option? And then once we've reached that capacity limit, we would no longer be able to, without upgrades to servicing, we would no longer be able to allow any additional units.
Yeah, through the mayor to the question, I don't know that we know really what kind of uptake we will get. And County Public Works will continue to monitor. I think that's why we've required it in the zoning for each building permit application, so that it's continually being checked and continually being monitored, because we don't know how much, or it's also, there's a difficulty in tracking. Like, you can have a single detached dwelling that has 8 or 10 people in it. Like, it's a tricky thing to track just based on unit numbers.
So, if that's the we would have to assess on an ongoing basis or on an individual application basis. There wouldn't necessarily be a way for us to protect against sort of cumulative impacts of that. And then what would happen if we came to a situation where one person on the street was sort of the last mover on something like this, was the one that got denied the application because the service wasn't available? Would it fall on that singular application to pay for service upgrades, or how would that? Obviously, it's a result of a number of different residential applications going through for this, but only the person who kind of tips the scale and says, no, it's no longer feasible. Is that contemplated in the process right now?
Through the mayor to the question, I don't think that really is I mean, we've been directed by the province really to require these as much as we feel we can. And I could possibly get some more clarification from County Public Works on that. But I think it's just going to be ongoing monitoring and making sure we don't get to that kind of situation.
I'll attempt to add a little bit to that. I think the more clarification from Public Works formally would be a good thing. But to some extent, this will be similar to what County Public Works does for all water and wastewater servicing, right? So whether it's an ARU or a plan of subdivision for 200 units, I think there's a constant monitoring of how much capacity is left, how much capacity are we actually able to use, how much is going to be used by this application, that application, how much can be foreseen, and they're constantly doing that in the background, assessing it. But as Megan said, you have a house and a house next door. Did they use the same water wastewater capacity? So that is, even if you know exactly how many ARUs or how many units are in a subdivision, it's still for Public Works a bit of an estimation game as to where is that capacity going to go. So I think my guess is that the formal answer we get from Public Works will be something like that. We will be constantly assessing this and constantly trying to estimate how much more demand this is going to cause, and how much capacity is left. Because again, like Megan said, you can have a giant $1 million home with one person in it who lives in Toronto 5 days a week, or you could have a tiny home with 7 people in it, and they're there working from home all the time. So it's a very difficult thing for Public Works to estimate those things. Deputy Mayor Gray.
Just a related comment about the capacity. I know that County Public Works were consulted when we were having the discussions around the redevelopment of the Maple Leaf property. We have, Tempsford has a development that has already been approved, that's well underway, and then the Maple Leaf property has not, the remainder of it hasn't been formally approved yet. So maybe in clarifying with County Public Works with that wastewater capacity and how and when it's calculated, we've asked for that capacity, and we were given, Maple Leaf used so much that there was so much available for that development. Is that factored in yet, even though that development has not been approved? And if there's a quick uptick in ARUs, but the development approval process is slowed, is there potential for that to have impact on some of those larger developments that are already in process but are still within the planning process? So, individual variances, like obviously there's a bit of a buffer zone in terms of you know, a range of capacity, but something like 120 acres of additional development coming, is that being sort of earmarked ahead of considering, you know, additional ARU applications in the immediate future? And then obviously, like, there's unknown potential future development, but that's for capacity of the future to consider and what types of upgrades could be made to the system at that point, if possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think usually once they're draft approved, the applications are draft approved, they're considered commended capacity, and they would consider that as taken already. But I can confirm that.
Any other questions? Councillor Mitchell?
Yeah, Megan, thanks for all the additional information you included, because I had a fairly long list when I went through your presentation, but as I read further, some of the questions were answered. But the questions I've got left on my list, is there any requirement that the property owner is a resident of the principal dwelling or of the ARU?
No, and we haven't included that in the policies or the zoning provisions, and the Planning Act actually doesn't allow us to.
Okay, so
to
they
do that.
potentially both could be rented out.
That's right.
Okay. On page 7 of the report, it talks about square footage, and it's so would it be possible for a 2,000 square foot house in Thamesford to be divided into a 1,000 square foot apartment and 2 500 square foot apartments? That would meet the restrictions on the 50% total. So you could potentially have a mini apartment building in a relatively small house.
Yes, I think that's
Okay.
one way you could look at it.
And
As
I
long
guess-
as one unit is bigger than the other two.
As long as the one unit, yeah. Okay. And I guess depends upon your view of this whole project, whether that would be a good thing or not. But the third question is, the minimum 1.48 acres for any property that's not in a service village, is that so that the wells and the septic systems have enough room to be far enough apart?
Yes, that's the intention. So there's the minimum lot area for a single detached dwelling is 0.3 hectares. So we've just times that by 2 to allow the space for two systems, essentially. And we are aware that in settlement areas, there could be, where there's multiple septic systems and multiple wells, there could
Yeah.
be impacts to the overall
So we
environmental health.
need enough area to make sure that there's separation between
Yep.
the good water and the bad water. Two more. Occupants ARUs, would they be covered under the Landlord and Tenant Act? Would they have how tenants have all the same rights as any other renter?
Yes, I mean, if they're renting, then yes, they would be.
Okay. And my last question is, the extension to 20 years from Garden Suites, how does that different from what the rules are now? As far as and I think, if I remember correctly, people have to come to us for renewal on Garden Suites after, I think it was 3 years or something like that, but how does this new ruling compare to how Garden Suites have been treated up till now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so garden suites have been addressed differently across the different townships in the county. So originally under the Planning Act, they were for a maximum of 10 years, and then they've changed it to 20 years several years ago now. But the official plan policies weren't updated yet, so we updated the official plan policies from 10 years to 20 years. But many of the townships have actually been approving the individual zone change applications for more like 5 years or whatever their standard is.
So
But I think your current zoning bylaw, is 10 years, and you'd be going to 20.
So under the new policy, it's just they're allowed to build it for 20 years, and they're good for 20 years, and no renewals, no. Okay, that's my list.
Any other questions on the report? Are there any members of the public here who have questions on the report? So then we have moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that pursuant to the Planning Act, the public meeting be adjourned at 10:26 a.m. and the regular meeting of council be called back to order. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that the Council of the Township of Zorra approve in principle the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, file number ZN5-23-04, to introduce amendments to Township zoning bylaw number 35-99, and that the bylaw be brought back to the next council meeting. And further, that council direct township staff to implement a process to confirm servicing capacity with the county that is acceptable to both the county and the township prior to approval of any building permit to establish an additional residential unit. And further, that council direct township staff to review and report back to council regarding implementation of a licensing registration system or other process to confirm compliance with all municipal requirements. And further, that council direct township staff to prepare a follow-up report in 6 months regarding the ARU process. Deputy Mayor Grigg, as the mover, do you wish to speak to that?
Yes, please. Thank you, Megan, for that excellent presentation. I think a couple of the things that stood out to me is, we've had minor variance applications to permit, variations on what our previous policies permitted in terms of, these additional residential scenarios across the township in all sorts of places. As you were stepping us through where these policies are landing, it's great to hear sort of some of the rationale behind them and some of the consultation, the extensive consultation with the various agencies that informed these policies. So yes, there's direction given by the province, but within a local context, we've, planning, you've had the ability to have that consultation with public health, with fire department, with public works, and there's good, strong rationale behind how we're going to implement this in a way that's going to be, as beneficial to our residents as possible. We're most definitely in a significant housing crisis, and this is obviously an attempt at helping make some headway on that. And so let's get this back at the next meeting so we can get this rolling and start to see hopefully some of that impact start happening. But the piece about the report back in 6 months, we can look at policy through our expert lens all day, every day, but until we actually implement it, we're not going to fully understand what types of unintended barriers may exist in adjacent and related policies. And, there's value in having good intentions and taking a good kick at the can. There's added value in circling back with through the lens of experience to say, how can we take this one step further to make sure that we're not inadvertently, unintentionally still upholding some barriers that are deterring residents from being able to access this opportunity to create additional housing. When I think of some of the applications that come forward where people are looking to have spaces for their relatives to live, for their young adult children to be able to live there, for their aging parents to remain, in place, this is going to make those types of options so much more attainable. And for every senior that maybe is overhoused in a nice bungalow on Byron Street, if they have the ability to, live on site in an ARU with their relatives, they not only have that close to home support that keeps them in home longer while still maintaining some independence, but it's creating a vacancy in a home that then gets to go back to market and can house, if it's 3 bedrooms with one person, that's an unfortunate underuse of that unit. So that is sort of some of the rationale for what I'm supporting in this motion. And again, just thanks to Megan for the excellent presentation on this.
Councillor Stewart is the seconder. Do you wish to speak to it? Anyone else? Councillor Mitchell.
I think this is part of the whole process that started with the province, worked its way down through the county, and we're just playing our role here. And I think it addresses the housing shortage that we have, and it also addresses changes that have happened over the last 100 years. We have a lot of houses in our municipality that were built at a time when everybody had 8 kids and there was 3 generations living in them, and now those houses potentially could be used as small rental apartments, and it also addresses, you know, especially people that are property rich and maybe income poor, and they can use this as a way to stay in a house that they want to live in for the foreseeable future. So there's a number of ways of addressing the housing crisis. The one is expropriating a lot of land and putting up a lot of new houses. Another way is making better use of the housing that you have here, the property area that you have here, and I think there's going to be some NIMBYism come out when these projects get approved, but I think we have a serious problem, and this is a bit of an outside-of-the-box way of looking at it, and I think that we need to approve this and move forward with it. So thanks for the report and the recommendations, and I fully support the motion that we have before us.
Anyone else? I fully support it. I think those that have spoken for it have said everything that I would say about it. I guess 2 things I would add. One is additional residential units initially started out as an Oxford County planning initiative. Then, like, the province joined in and said, so first of all, credit where credit's due. Second thing is, I really like the language that you used about, I can't remember exactly what it was now, but about, you know, implementing this and then looking for ways that we can be more permissive as we go forward, and how other policies, you know, related and unintentionally may actually make this not as effective. Because I think as you said, we need to do this, and we need to make sure that there aren't unintended obstacles. So I really think this is a good way to do that. Implement it, get going. I do have a concern around the acreage, you know. Does it really need to be 1.4 whatever it is acres, or does it just need to be effective septic and far enough away from a well? If that happens to be 1.4 or whatever, that's fine. But if the functional goals can be achieved with less, why does it really matter? You know. So I think we need to. Those are some of the areas that I'm hoping that we'll look at as we go forward and say, surely it's a functional requirement, and 1.48 might be way more than enough in some circumstances. You know, I can think of a property in the north end of the township that's, you know, only 1.23 acres, but there's no wells or septic anywhere near it, and it'd be totally fine. And I'm sure there's lots of properties like that around where it could be done. So I think I think this is a good way. This is a good way to approach this. To, like, let's start, learn stuff, and immediately look for ways to improve it right away. Anybody else before I call the question? I'm not going to read it again. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And we have 15 minutes until the delegation, so maybe we will go to 8.6A Corporate Services Department, Report 2023-060 from the Chief Administrative Officer regarding 2023 to 2026 Strategic Plan. Dawn, is there anything you want to highlight for council in there?
No, just looking at the way that the plan will be structured and the way that council is going to evaluate all of the ideas that were submitted. In the past, for the previous 2 plans, it was under the 4 pillars, and each of the ideas that was submitted was placed under the 4 pillars. Council really didn't have any way of saying yes or no, or any discernible way of giving rationale for each one. It was more of a touch and feel of what they felt should be included. With the triple bottom line, there is nothing finite in there that will say that a threshold has to be met, but it does give council some opportunity to say that one of the items that's submitted doesn't fall under the 3 principles that are outlined in the triple bottom line. So it does provide a bit more guidance, but still gives council a bit of leeway to include items that may not fit, you know, in a certain way under the plans.
Questions from council? Councilor Mitchell.
Procedural question, Don. Is it the plan at our next council meeting, we will take a look at the list that's been submitted on a line-by-line basis, and by consensus, we'll decide what goes in and what doesn't go in?
That's correct.
Okay, and that's what we've done in the past. Is
Yeah, and I
we
would just
hash it out among ourselves.
I would clarify procedurally what we've normally done,
Yeah.
and I mean, it'll be up to council if they want to do different, but what we've normally done is exactly that, through consensus, sort of general nodding of heads, that one's in, okay, it's in. If there's disagreement at all, then it's like, you know, I mean, it'll be kind of up to me, but if the disagreement reaches a certain point, then I will say, okay, somebody needs to put a motion on the floor, because I mean, that's the transparent, fair way for us, the five of us, to resolve our differences on behalf of residents, is to do that. So I think what I would plan on doing, which is what I did last time, and I believe what Mayor Lupton did the time before that, was when there's general nodding of heads, it's in. When there's disagreement, then it'll be like somebody should put a motion on the floor. We should debate that and have a vote on it as to whether it's in or not, and then the possibility to amend it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if that's okay with council, that's the way I would intend on doing it, but I would certainly encourage you to think about that between now and then, and if we want to do it differently than that, we certainly can. And there's everything possible up to a formal, a formal motion that lists them all out, what you do and don't want included. I think it's probably, in my opinion, it has been effective to do it that way, but there you go.
Yeah, having been through, the three of us were through the process before, and I think if we're looking at over 50 points, if we're going to have a motion up for each one, and I think a lot of some of the report, I know the ones that I submitted, there's a lot of similarity to them, and we can just, I think the ones that were submitted by members of council, we can explain why we think that should be in there and come to a consensus. And I agree, if we get to a point where there's something in there where there is some controversy over it and we need to formally debate it, yeah, then that's the way to put it in. But yeah, I agree with the process.
I'll be happy to make that call as I read the room if I think there's one of those, but by all means, any one of you can also at any point say, I'm going to make a motion to put that one in, and you can initiate that yourselves. So procedurally, I think we have all the tools available to do it, and I think we can navigate it. Deputy Mayor.
I think this is a question for Don. Can you just clarify then, so as we are, as you've just described, sort of moving through some general nodding of heads and some motions when needed to make the tougher decisions, that will happen at the May 17th meeting. And can you then clarify what the next steps are for the strategic plan at subsequent meetings, sort of taking us straight to full adoption of?
So once the list has been compiled by council, at the first meeting in June, we will bring back a prioritized list. And if council's happy with that, and if there's any other wording changes they want to see in the draft strategic plan, then it would go to final approval for the second meeting in June.
And just to add to that, the prioritized list that council has received before, after the SMT meets, will sort of say where they think, based on resources and other timelines, each one of those projects would most appropriately be done, right? And of course, council will say, do them all in 2023. And they will explain that, there's resource constraints and interaction on some of these policies with other places where it might make more sense to do it in a certain year. But that'll be part of, the SMT will do all that work, and that'll obviously be available to council to question and say, could we, if council thinks certain ones need to be a priority, is there a way to reprioritize this? That'll be part of that discussion at that time too. Councilor Mitchell.
And a comment, I like the breakdown, and as you said, these are examples of concepts and to be fleshed out. I got no problem with what you've got listed there. I think when we get to the actual items, there's going to be some debate and some disagreement of how that's implemented, based largely on what our different views as the role of a council and the role of a municipality is. Part of me looks forward to that debate, some part of me doesn't, but I think it's a debate that we need to have so that whether we all end up agreeing on the strategic plan or not, so that we hash this all out so that we know where we are going forward. And so, yeah, I think it's a good framework. I look forward to the actual items. I've gone through the list that we had a couple weeks ago. I know it's not complete, and there's some redundancies in there, but I look forward to the discussion and the debate.
Anyone else? Councilor Stewart.
Yeah, just a couple more questions so I can get my head wrapped around this process a bit. Are we hoping, obviously when we're filtering the submitted items into these three categories, are we hoping to better define, like they all have their own definition, social, environmental, and economic. Are we hoping to better define exactly what they mean for us based on those items in the strategic plan then?
Yes, so what you see on the screen now was just put in there for discussion, and hopefully council can better define what they feel is important under those three pillars.
So, and further to that, and looking forward over the next four years, implementing these things or other things that come up, and your report talks about the potential of a scorecard, more so for, you know, when we're assessing things in the future, I think is the intention for that. How do you see that actually working in policy changes, anything going forward? Do you see something like a scorecard coming back to the strategic plan, how we defined it specifically for ourselves?
Yes, so what council would consider on a yearly basis would just be sort of like a check-in to see how they've done with after each year. And then at the end of it, we would do a summary report for council at the end of their term.
Would individual decisions that staff brings to council throughout the year at any time be measured at all against the triple bottom line as part of the reports that come to council? Is that the intention?
Yeah, so we would change our template to marry up to what the new strategic plan would be, and any items that do come to council, where appropriate, they would include references to the strategic plan and the pillars that they fall under.
Anyone else? Questions? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that council endorse the use of a triple bottom line approach to evaluating perspectives for inclusion in the strategic plan. Councillor Stewart, as the mover, do you wish to speak to that? Deputy Mayor Grigg. Anybody else? So I'm really excited about this strategic plan process. I think this will be the third time in a row that council's done this. I think, as Councillor Mitchell said, this is really important for council to hash this stuff out. There will be disagreements. That's why there's 5 of us and not 1 of us, so that we can disagree, talk about these things, residents can see, and we can set priorities and clearly articulate those priorities to ourselves, to hold ourselves accountable to the commitments we make, to staff so they know what we do and don't want them to work on, and most importantly to residents to know what the priorities are that council has set and what we're going to work towards for the next 3.5 years now. TikTok. So I'm very excited about this. I'm really looking forward. Again, agree with Councillor Mitchell. Part of me is looking forward to the debate. Part of me is not. But that's our job, right? Is to come in here and, frankly, you know, argue in a constructive and polite way about these things on behalf of our community and decide what those priorities are. And to me, this has served the township really well, this process in the past, and I think it's just getting better as we go forward. So I think this is going to be a really, really constructive process to go through. And if there's nothing else, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And we're not quite at 10:45 for the delegation. So I'm going to suggest we go to 11. Information items, Oxford County Report, PW 2023-24 Annual Energy Report. Any questions on that report? Not seeing any. Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that item 11A be received and filed for information purposes only. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And we have no unfinished business, no notices of motion. I'm going to... Oh, thank you. And we're at 10:45 now. That clock's a minute slow. So 10:45, delegation, Yvonne and Bob Belor, waiving Parkland fee request. So I'm going to ask you to come up to the delegation desk over there, and staff will make sure that mic is working. You can sit. You don't have to stand.
No, I'm okay standing. It's fine.
Okay. Is that mic going to pick?
Oh, I don't have to sing, do I?
You can. There's no reason that you can't, but you don't have to.
Oh,
I'll
don't
turn it
think
over to you then.
I don't think you want me to. Okay. I'm assuming all have read the letter we submitted, so I'm not going to repeat it. Hello, I'm Yvonne Belor, along with my husband and son. We are the new and old residents of 126 Commissioner Street. We are asking for the $4,500 in lieu of green space fee to be waived. Our new structure replaces a structure that was on the same land plot since the 1920s. At the end of the day, it is still the same amount of land with a single structure that was there prior to the replacement build. From our understanding, the Parkland Dedication Initiative was established to ensure that Zorra can continue to provide green space for parks and recreation for the community, both existing and future community. Building this one structure, despite the land being divided into 2 lots, does not impact the green space of the community in a negative way as it does with a new development. The redevelopment of 126 Commissioner Street was done so with community in mind. The previous structure was aged and beyond reasonable upgrades and improvements. Philip agreed to build a duplex and sever half of his existing property to allow him to remain in his community. Philip has lived, I'm a little nervous. Philip has lived at this location since 2004 when he purchased the home at age 19. In today's economy, Philip only had 2 options considering the condition of his home. He needed to sell and find something still affordable to buy or rent with the equity he earned. The housing market for a single human making his wages is not promising. His other option was to build this duplex with his parents. That's a little funny, isn't it? This agreement allowed him to afford a new home and remain in his community where he has roots, friends, and 3 households of immediate family close by. The new dwelling has increased the curb appeal of the neighborhood and the real estate value of the homes around. It also has produced another household for tax revenue. Under the current economic circumstances, construction was beyond what was expected. This home was built by 2 parties who do not have excessive funds, and throughout the build made financially conscious decisions. While $4,500 does not seem like a significant fee when compared to the overall cost of the build, it still has a significant impact on both parties. Unlike with bigger developers, there was no financial gain to be made by building this property. The only gain was quality of lifestyle. Taking into consideration that the redevelopment of Lot 126 Commissioner Street in Embro does not take away from existing green space, nor did it use up pre-existing farmland, we feel that we should be exempt from this rule, and we kindly ask for council to approve our request. Your bylaw 52-19 states that the township may require payment of this money. It doesn't say shall. Therefore, we respectfully request that this fee be waived.
Thank you. Questions for the delegation from council? Councilor Mitchell.
Okay, so what you just said throws a different light than what at least my interpretation of what the letter was. So you have a double lot which has been split into 2 lots?
We have a single lot.
It was a single lot.
It's just a single lot, yeah, with 1 house, and then we put a semi on it. 1 house. It's very unique.
But where's the second lot come into the?
It doesn't have a second lot. We're going to sever it, so there will be 2 lots.
Okay.
From the 1 lot.
That's the crux of the issue. So it's a single lot, but it's big enough that it's going to be split into 2 lots.
Right.
So you will have another lot with whatever the value of that lot is, which you could sell or you could build on it.
Well, we have built 2. It's one building with 2 houses. No, I guess it's a semi, what it is. So we want to sever. We're severing off half of it. So the line right there through the center.
But it's still the same lot Philip owned. It's for a single. I don't have a lot. We don't have a lot of property on our lot. What?
Maybe somebody else understands, but
No.
I'm confused with what's happened here.
So I guess, yeah, can staff or somebody clarify exactly what the previous state was and what the new state will be, Mike?
So there was a single lot with one house on it. So then the application came in to build a semi, right? So there's basically 2 units on the one lot, but they do have the opportunity to split that down the middle and have one that will be sellable in the future, right? It was a decision discussed, and maybe the right thing to do, so they would be able to sell one in the future. But basically, it was a single R1 lot that this house sat on.
So just to further clarify, there's currently 1 lot.
Yeah.
Is there an application to sever and
Which
make
has
it
been
2?
passed.
County, yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay, so there will be 2 lots. When this process is finished, there will be
Mhm.
2 lots with two separate residences, one on each lot.
So Philip will own one side and we'll own the other.
That
And we'll be both
answer your question?
taxpayers.
So it's one building but 2 residences.
Right,
So it's a duplex.
yeah.
Okay. Okay, but there's 2 lots.
Yeah, not
Okay.
super common in Zorra, right? But in theory, this is similar to what you see in like large urban areas where the property line is the wall between 2 buildings kind of a thing, right?
Okay.
Deputy Mayor Gregg.
Like, just to further clarify, like any of the semi-detached homes that have recently been built in Temsford, those are freehold. So in order for someone to have title for their residence, it has to be a separate property, even though they share a wall with the neighboring property. So this is just creating the ability for, a duplex would be 2 residential units in one building on one property, where this is the ability for the ownership on title to be separate for the 2 units, even though they share that centerline wall. So there's not an application to develop a new lot for some future development. It's the redevelopment of the single home into the semi-detached home, then a follow-up request to sever the lot so that they're separate, on separate title.
Any other questions for the delegation? Councillor Finch.
This one's for Diane. What is the money used for?
The park fees that are collected go into a reserve, and this reserve is dedicated strictly for any future park enhancements. So in the past, we have funded trails, the trails through the Matheson Park, also a soccer project. We also funded the Memorial Park over the last 5-6 years.
And so if the fee isn't paid, then where does this money come from?
If there's no fees available, these projects would be funded through taxation, grants, donations, any other form of monies.
No?
Yeah, but nobody else put their hand?
And has Zorra ever waived a fee like this before?
I'm not aware of any. I'd have to look into it further, but I don't believe so.
Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I don't know if Diane or Spencer or Mike would be best to answer this one. And the new legislation that's come down in the last couple of years from the province, does it have any impact on our ability to charge this fee?
I would say no.
Spencer?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, this question. Bill 23 anticipated will have some changes for parkland education. However, Untitled Chapter current bylaw speaks to parkland education and the collection of these fees are remain intact. But the Zorra bylaw does speak to something including the 2023 fiscal period. So the collection of parkland fees for 2023 will remain unchanged.
Any other? Councillor Stewart.
So just to be clear, if there was no application in to sever, there would not be a requirement to pay the fee, correct?
Deputy Mayor Gregg.
Oh, sorry.
Spencer?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Stewart's question. The mechanism here through which the township is collecting this fee is the law
Deputy Mayor Grigg.
I have a question for, actually, I don't know who it's for. Might be Diane. I'll just ask it. So, in response to one of the questions that Councillor Finch asked, you described some of the projects that funds have gone towards from this reserve. So they're collected, they go to reserve, and then they're funding specific approved improvements to parklands, and could be used for acquiring additional parklands at some point in the future. So my question is, like, I'm looking at $70,000 worth of park upgrades that we've done out of that reserve in the last 7 years. Do we have anything that indicates if these funds have all come through large developers that are doing new development, or have any of these funds come out of similar situations where there's smaller infill projects where new lots are created within existing settlement boundaries?
I can look that up for you if you like, but there has been there has been funds that have gone into there from the development from subdivisions and that's correct.
Any other questions?
Could I maybe ask a follow-up to Spencer as he deals with some of these applications? Because I know, like, there's one right around the corner from me right now where there's a lot that's doing something similar. So would they also be, like, of these similar applications we've seen come forward, have they contributed these funds? Have they been charged to these applicants as well? I know we haven't done any additional waivers. Have they also been charged these fees every time that a new lot has been created?
Anytime a new lot is created in the township, Parkland Delegation, I'm not aware of any exemptions or
Any other questions for the delegation or staff? Not seeing any.
And I do know that they do waive. There is, I know the town of Tilsonburg from a reputable source. They waive the single home, like, there is no monetary gain here. Like, I don't know where I'm gonna live if I sell my side. And Philip's not leaving, he's only been here since he's 19. Like, there's no monetary gain. We're not the Langlois. You know, we aren't a development. It's just, and then this money just comes out of, like, wow. Like, we have paid township fees and county fees, a lot. It's just one more thing, and it's killing us. It was a shocker. I'm just saying, that's exactly how I feel about. And then we have a very small side property. So that's there. I'm just bleeding my heart.
Any other questions before I read the motion? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Mitchell, that council decline the request to waive the parkland dedication fee and that the delegation from Yvonne and Bob Belor be received and filed for information purposes only. Deputy Mayor Grigg, as the mover, do you wish to speak to that?
Yes, please. So I want to start by being clear that I think that this is great development and exactly what it is that we're looking to have happen across the township. It's the impact. The impact is on the pressures on existing parkland of these types of projects. They're not significant, but they do have a cumulative impact. And so there has to be a proportional responsibility to contributing to this that meets the scale and scope of the development. So, for example, 120 acres of development in Tempsford is going to see a different parkland dedication or cash in lieu requirement versus in a small infill lot like this one. But if we, are waiving this infill lot, then I think we're waiving all infill lots to be equitable. In which case I refer back to the trails expansion, the Matheson Park trails, the soccer project, the Memorial Park improvements, and think, how are we going to then fund those projects if we don't have the full scope of intended resources to pay for it? Growth should pay for growth, and proportional to the scope of the growth. So this is small growth, but it's still growth. And, I'm definitely aware of the cost of construction, but I'm also aware of the cost of living. And earlier in the council meeting, we had a report, our tax rate report, and Councillor Mitchell made a comment on the pressures we had to get the levy down, and that, in a sense, we really lucked out that the county levy, being small as it was, and the education levy being nothing, allowed for the total tax impact for our residents to be a little bit more digestible than the 8 point whatever it was percentage that we were, initially starting with. And even with that, it took a lot of carving down for us to get it there. And so to not charge growth for growth doesn't remove the burden. It just repositions it from growth to the tax base. And that shift of burden, of the financial burden from those who are creating new lots to the tax base, those who are not responsible for the growth should not have to pay for it. And once this fee is paid, it's a one-time fee. And so moving forward, it will only be your tax contributions that you'll be paying to the tax levy to pay for, what we deem to be the appropriate level, to provide recreation and all the other services that we provide to residents. And future infill lots and future developments, those fees charged by them, provided we're still permitted to charge those fees, would then mean that the impact, the pressures on your property taxes then will not reflect that new growth. The additional housing is going to create additional bodies one way or another. And eventually one swing bay is not enough, and then there needs to be two. And a new swing bay isn't, a huge cost, but it does cost something, and that does have to come from somewhere. And I think this policy, as intended, will cover what those costs are. And in this example, I understand the financial pressures. I think we're all feeling them one way or another. I do believe that it is operating as intended, and there's nothing exceptional about this case that makes it different than the other cases where this fee has been charged and paid and put back into those park improvements for the community. So that's why I'm putting forth this motion.
Councillor Mitchell is the seconder.
I'm supporting the motion because my initial reaction was that we should go ahead and waive the fee, that it encourages infill. The applicants would go away happy. $4,500 is not an insignificant amount of money, but when it's part of a multi-million-dollar budget, it's not going to make or break the township. But the more I thought about it, the financial implications and especially the precedents that we would be setting by waiving this, because we are encouraging a lot of infill. And I looked at our capital budget and where this money would be going. As far as in 2023, we're looking at $95,000 for playgrounds, $279,000 for parks and trails, and that includes almost $65,000 commitment to the Embro Park Pavilion that the township has made as our share of that project. And as Director of Finance answered in response to Councillor Finch's question, where does this money come from if it doesn't come from here? And it comes from taxation. And all we can do to get revenue is taxation, development fees or parkland fees, and new legislation from the province is limiting what we can charge for development fees. Creating a new lot does create new value for the homeowners. Whether they choose to collect on that value by selling is entirely up to them, but 2 lots is worth more than 1 lot. Large developers are required to put aside property for parkland to provide green space, and small developers, as was noted in the letter, it's not practical to dedicate a piece of this property for parkland, and so the alternative is, as has been the practice in the past, a fee of 5% be charged to people that develop new properties, which is essentially by severing a lot is essentially what's being done here. So I'm very leery about setting precedents, as the deputy mayor said. If we waive the fee here, then why would we not waive the fee for every other infill that comes before us? So much as I understand the request, I think that it's not something that we should approve, that the fee is there for a reason, and that we should not make an exception in this case.
Anyone else? Just before I call the question then, I feel bad about this.
I'll
It
just
is
rethink
that-
my
well, No,
donations.
sorry, the delegation portion's over. Council's debating the motion on the floor now, sorry. I feel bad about it because it is the kind of development that we want to have, and it's people in our community building homes and infill and brownfield, and they want to stay there. That's all a good thing. But there is definitely a fairness component. Other, people who have had similar circumstances have paid the fee. So to me, I always look for, well, is there a reason to not pay this fee? To me, I don't see a distinct difference between this and all the other circumstances, and I'm certainly not prepared to consider a policy change that would waive this fee. And there, to add to the discussion about, if we waive that $4,500, which, depending on which projects we talk about today in Parkland, whether you take all the ones for the whole township or just for Embro, we're talking at a minimum sort of, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10% of the overall budget for Parkland. That's not a small amount of money. That adds up. That's how taxation happens, $4,500 at a time. But there's another option, and that is if it doesn't happen through these fees and if it doesn't happen through taxation, the other option is it doesn't happen at all. And then the improvements to the parks in Embro and the rest of the township and possible new parks with new development don't have that money to make those changes happen. And then they're not happening at all. I would also point out that I think some of us have been contacted by residents in the context of another possible development, and one of their main concerns with that development is green space in Parkland. And part of my response to them is that when new development happens in the township, we collect fees for green space in Parkland in order to preserve those green space in Parkland. And if we don't collect it, then how do we respond to residents' concerns for green space in Parkland? Because then we either are not doing it or we're taxing everybody else for it. There is no, in a municipal context, there's no discount that can be offered. If the fee is not paid by one, it's simply paid by someone else, or we don't get the service that we want. There's no free ride for anyone in this. Everybody's a taxpayer, and that's it. We pay for the services we get, or we don't get the services we don't pay for. So for all those reasons, I will be supporting the motion, even though it doesn't make me feel good. Unfortunately, in this job, you have to make the decisions that you think are fair and are going to deliver for residents, and I think that what is fair and what's going to deliver for residents of the township is to charge the fee for this as we have for every other similar development that we have had in the past and that we will have in the future. Anybody else before I read the question and read the motion and call the question? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Mitchell, that council decline the request to waive the Parkland dedication fee and that the delegation from Yvonne and Bob Belor be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you for your delegation.
Can I say one thing?
That portion's over.
Okay.
But you're absolutely free to contact any member of council that you want to talk to them about it at any time. All our contact info is available on the website, phone numbers, emails, etc. Thanks. And we are up now to, next timed item is at 11:45. So let's move to item, so we have no unfinished business, no notice of motion, so item 14, bylaws. I'm always kind of nervous to do that before the end. But let's do it. Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that bylaw 22-23, 23-23, 24-23, 25-23, and 26-23 be taken as read a first, second, and third time and finally passed, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto. Any discussion? Oh, Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I had asked Karen about this, and I just like her response on this. And That was the fees bylaw, and I was asking for some clarity on the stormwater part of it, because all the other fees are one time or on request, whereas the stormwater one is a monthly fee, and that's not specified in this or in the stormwater bylaw, or it wasn't in the last report we got. So Karen and I have exchanged emails on this, so I just want her take on how we can make that more clear in this bylaw.
Yeah, thanks. I did update it to add a slash and monthly in that section of the consolidated bylaw that will go out. So that was good clarification. Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify that because it was different than what the bylaw in the agenda was, and once we passed it, that's the way it is, and it's better now than controversy later. Somebody saying, I paid that $6. Why did I get another bill this?
Anything else on bylaws? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And items of community interest and the calendar. So today we are at, where are we? May 3rd. So Councillor Finch and I are hosting a informal meeting tonight in the small hall in Embro about the potential declaration of surplus land at the rec center. And tomorrow night at 5 o'clock, I think at Tempsford Public School is the kindergarten welcome event that you and I are attending. Are we? And Lisa, you're attending as well? And at 5 till when? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's just till 6.
Yeah. And then, what else? I feel like there's something on this weekend that I'm missing here. No?
Live fire in Ingersoll. First weekend is Saturday, and second one is next Saturday. Just 2 sessions.
Okay. Okay. So there's one on the 13th? Okay. When is it on the 13th?
They'll be there 8 till 4.
Okay.
I won't be there that day, so if you just give me a heads up that you're going, I'll make sure T.O. Muscle's aware, and then I can send a quick memo on what you need to wear and where to check in. But yes, I do encourage, go check it out.
Strongly encourage. And plan to spend time because it's hard to leave. And somebody said about Harrington auction is on Saturday. Thank you. And then Councillor Finch and I are going to speak to Canberra Courts Board on the evening of Tuesday the 16th. And we're back here on the 17th, I think. Unless I'm missing anything. Councillor Finch?
On the 14th is the Legion brunch.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I know
Councillor
it's
Mitchell.
Tonight, Brown's Corner is Wisdom Wednesday. The speaker is Laura Fraser, who will be presenting similar to what we got 6 weeks ago on the Farmer Wellness Initiative.
Chief?
I know it's after the next meeting, but is it an okay time to give a quick
Yep.
update on Camp Molly?
Yeah, absolutely.
Registrations closed yesterday. I'm just waiting for the export from the website to collate everything, and I think there might be a few that sneak in this week. We did a presentation to all grade 9 girls in the county yesterday and shared some information there, so the school board pushed it a little bit more. But certainly lots of registrations that came through. I don't know if anyone's driven by the Tempsford station, but there's 7 car shells sitting out there right now that were donated very generously from Toyota. So a really safe way for the girls to be able to cut with no trim, no airbags, no fuel tanks, just a perfect opportunity. And we're looking on getting a couple full cars so they can still have the fun of breaking glass and doing some of that stuff and cribbing, right? So get the full experience. Conestoga's also partnered with us, and they're bringing in full VR simulations, so the ladies will have the opportunity to do forcible entry and work in a townhouse. simulated fire that never gets hotter, never gets smokier, and they just can be in that environment. And then partner that with some forcible entry, so they'll do the physical prop and the virtual prop and experience some of that. And then we've got the support from a London fire prevention officer and the provincial fire investigation team. They're coming in and we're going to build a burn cell and work with Ingersoll Fireground and run some evolutions out of there on the Saturday. So they'll get to do a full excavation and hopefully spark some of that math and science side of things and show another aspect of the fire service. So we're gearing up for June 1st to 4th, and the last thing I wanted to share is that we received a major donation from 100 Women Who Care of Oxford. It was a Dragon's Den style pitch for 5 minutes, at which time they voted, and Camp Molly in Zorra was the recipient of just under $10,000 to support the initiative. So looking forward to it. And I hope that you're able to attend. Graduation will be on the Sunday, but again, stop in any time and see what the girls are participating in, and lots of volunteers coming in and spending some time in Zorra for the weekend.
Councillor Mitchell.
That's all wonderful news, great, and I just want to comment that the only thing that comes close to live fire training as much fun is breaking glass.
Anything else on the calendar that I missed, Deputy Mayor Gregg?
We have a multi-use courts meeting on Tuesday, the 9th, and then we have Beachville District Museum the following day, Wednesday evening at on the 10th. And then it's past the next meeting, but it's never too early to start talking about Calathumpian. Calathumpian is running the May long weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. There's lots of different events. There's lots of online information. It's on the website. They're plugging stuff through their social media channels at all times. There's lots of different partners involved that are running different components of the meetings, or sorry, of the weekend. Registration is open for ball hockey. So lots of really cool, exciting things going on, and lots of ways to find out about it. Also, they have started, I don't know if they've finished their door-to-door canvassing campaign, where they are accepting donations to help offset the cost of running these things that are predominantly free to the community. And the trade-off for making your donation is you get one of the flyers, and the flyer is the guide to having the most fun in your life on a May long weekend.
And on that point, my phone was actually buzzing here during the meeting of family members making their travel plans to be in Zorra for the Calathumpian weekend. So it's a big deal. Anything else on the calendar while we're on it? So I think that's all we have now until our 11:45 recognition. So I think we're going to take a break and come back in here just before, let's say just before 11:45, if everybody's good with that. All right. Lisa, will you let us know when we're off? I'm going to call the meeting to order, and we have a pretty cool item on the agenda today, I think, where we are going to acknowledge someone that we have attempted to acknowledge before, but she was too busy for us to acknowledge her, which is in keeping in character, really. I'm retired. So yeah. I know that Dawn and Katie both want to say some words, so I'm going to turn it over to Dawn to start, and then Katie, and then I'll finish off. And certainly, if anybody else wants to, let me know.
All right, I'll try and get through this. So it was 27 years ago that I walked into the council chambers as a scared, nervous job applicant for Zorra's CAO position. At the time, 11 members of council were sitting around the table and were all present. It was overwhelming for someone of my age. I took my seat in the firing line. After I gathered myself, I had a look around the room. There was one kind, smiling face that stood out, Councillor Margaret Lupton. Not only was she the only female councillor, she was the one that put me at ease with her caring demeanor throughout the whole interview process. I was fortunate enough to be hired by Zorra, and have had the honor and privilege to work with Margaret for 22 years, including her 3 terms as mayor. From the outset, it was clearly evident how much she cared very deeply about her community and the friends and family that she represented, first as a ward councillor, then as mayor. Her decision-making was not solely driven by facts and figures, but through a holistic lens that took a caring and compassionate look at issues before council. She was the soul and the moral compass of council. That is to say, we didn't always agree, but we knew each other and we knew the assigned lanes that we were in, and we kept them. On the occasions when I was late with assignments, which I know is hard to believe, Margaret would turn her head ever so slightly and give me the teacher look. Not a word needed to be said. I just knew I had to do better. Margaret was always a strong supporter of staff, and we knew that she would always have our backs no matter what. As CAO, this was particularly comforting for me during the contentious issues such as Thamesford's sanitary sewer project, when a few of the local residents wanted my head on a platter. She stood by me, and for that I'll always be grateful. Under Margaret's leadership and vision, Zorra was able to put the building blocks in place that has allowed Thamesford to grow exponentially over the last 4 years. Thamesford and Embro had the necessary services installed, and hard decisions were required to make this happen. Zorra is now reaping the rewards for this forward thinking that exemplifies Margaret's leadership and foresight. To me, Margaret's passion for the environment and environmental issues is something that will always stick with me. Zorra was an early leader in recycling, implementation of bag tags, plastic bale wrap collection, and protection of our naturalized areas. Imagine convincing 10 grumpy old white men that recycling was important, or that we needed bag tags to extend the life of Oxford's landfill. She did it. That is a respect that she earned from her colleagues by being well-prepared, well-read, and the ability to speak passionately. She proudly wore the Zorra Bag Lady title with pride. I'm glad we were able to celebrate that remarkable contribution that Margaret has made to Zorra Township. The township is a better place to live and grow because of her. I'm a better person for having had the privilege of knowing and working with Margaret.
Deputy Mayor Grigg.
I kind of wish that I went first so I didn't have to speak after hearing that. I think we've had a few different opportunities to talk about Margaret around this table, and I've definitely had my opportunity, especially in the asset naming submission, to talk about the contributions, some of which Dawn has highlighted. So I'm going to limit my contribution today to something that's specific to my experience on council in relation to Margaret that would be very different than Marcus or Dawn's. So as a female elected official, I've connected and will continue to build relationships with women across the province who share the same passion for their communities as you and I do. We connect because it can be a difficult space for women to navigate, be effective, and respected. I'm often reminded through their stories how this space is not available everywhere because of the culture of that space. I did not experience that barrier because of you. I am here because of your years of dedication, service, because of the way that you took up space spoke eloquently, and your strength of leadership that I didn't shy away from following in your leadership footsteps. So as I continue to connect with women who struggle to find their place in this municipal realm, I take the opportunity to try to do for them what you have done for me and show them that this space is equally ours and our contributions equally valuable.
I'm going to start with greetings from East Zorra Tavistock Mayor Phil Schaefer, who's not able to be here today because they have their council meeting. He said, "I understand Margaret Lupton is being recognized today for her many years of service to Zorra Township. Here in East Zorra Tavistock, we were fortunate to have Margaret spend 4 years on our previous term of council. I know our members enjoyed her wise counsel, and she always fulfilled her role with dignity and empathy. Margaret and I carpooled to many meetings. As a rookie councillor, I learned as much from those brief conversations we had on our way to and from the meetings as I did at the meetings themselves. On behalf of the Township of East Zorra Tavistock, I would like to congratulate Margaret on this well-deserved honor. To quote the book of Matthew, "Well done, thy good and faithful servant." Thank you for the opportunity to share in this honor. And then my comments. Margaret dedicated 31 years to municipal government. She served as councillor in Zorra for 5 terms, including 3 as mayor and Oxford County councillor, and East Zorra Tavistock council for 1 term. Margaret's husband Charlie was the driving force behind the creation of this chain of office, and she placed it on me at my first inauguration. I remember when I first considered running for mayor that my children had only experienced a female mayor, so I thought I should run and show them that a man can do it too. I'll leave that to others to judge whether I can or not. Margaret has always been passionate about the environment, as Don said, and worked to implement many improvements in the areas of waste management and recycling initiatives in Zorra and Oxford. She was all about landfills before it was cool. She was one of the driving forces behind the collaboration that created the structured approach of the Joint Municipal Coordinating Committee. This committee brought together the affected municipalities in a structured way that critically and constructively evaluated the impacts of a private landfill on our communities. The end result of that proposal is in no small part due to her forward-looking efforts. I was mayor at the time of the issue's resolution, but let me be clear. I was fortunate to have sat in the shade of a tree that Margaret planted. Thank you. She was passionate about volunteerism in her community. She was a volunteer herself many times over, including, as I've been reminded, raking gravel from roadside allowances. Together with former Councillor Marie Kesey, she initiated the Zorra Volunteer Breakfast. She always had the right words for the occasion, as Deputy Mayor Grigg said, but more importantly, translated her words into action. But for me, as a resident and a politician, she was an example. How to do it with integrity. Smile, but tell them how it is. Modeling good council staff relations, difficult but respectful conversations. Almost every member of staff here started after she did. And mentoring hot-headed, overly ambitious councillors. I'm not sure who that's about really, but I'm sure there's somebody. And ultimately, she was an example by her behavior, contributing to the political culture of Oxford County. In any position I've ever been in, I'm always keenly aware that I'm not going to be in it forever. This means that the work that we do will continue after we are gone. And I hope so. I hope people better than me will come along and make better decisions for my community than I do today. We have a responsibility to leave things better than we find them. You affected many people, not least of all me. As I look at the Zorra and Oxford councils we have today, I am confident that you have left a mark in the people who sit there and the integrity they bring to the job. When I look at our communities, you left things better than you found them. From environmental awareness, to a county commitment to zero waste, to measurable waste reduction, to stopping a landfill, to a Zorra and Oxford commitment to 100% renewable energy, to measurable energy conversion. In my time in municipal government, and especially since you left your role as mayor and county councillor, you've been mentioned many times. People genuinely miss their time on council with you. They were pleasant and productive times. Your example is a challenge to us all. Thank you for challenging us.
Well, it was fun. I'm sitting here, it's not so good now that I have to do something. As I came in here this morning, I got wondering, how I got started on all of this, because it never ever was in my, bucket list to go on council. I never had any idea at all, but I had a neighbor that came in one day and thought I should do it, and I thought, well, it sounds interesting, I don't know, give it a try. So I did, and I went out campaigning and absolutely loved the campaigning part of it. I can tell you, from experience, campaigning is not about gathering up votes. It's about getting out and meeting your people and learning about them and what they're thinking and doing and saying and wanting, and it was just a great thing. My first meeting here, I was late. Not necessarily fashionably late, but I was late. It was a terrible day. It was a terrible icy day, and the roads were so bad. And everybody, when I walked in, you made it safely. Oh, this is so good. I'm so glad you're here. So I thought, okay, we'll just let it go at that. The real reason was I was lost. When I turned out of my driveway at home, I thought, you don't really know where you're going. So I headed south, and but I think I turned one road too soon or too late, because I did walk in here late. But I never really confessed to that until now. I just let them think that it was the hard driving that I went through. Today maybe I was a little late. I left in lots of time, but there were so many changes that I saw along the road that I just every so often had to kind of slow down a bit to have a look. I'll have a really slow drive home, I think. But I just couldn't have done any of this without all of you and all your predecessors. I mean, people have been so good to me. When you talk about, people told me I should expect some really nasty phone calls. I think in my entire time, I had 3. 2 of them were gentlemen who, after I explained to them why and what we were doing and the rules and regulations, came around. They were fine and thanked me. One man, he just wanted me mad, so I just let him go. It's just, you couldn't do anything. He was mad, so that was it. But I had very gracious care with so many people, and so many, I could write a book on the reasons as to why I was elected, why people gave me votes. I mean, when you walk into a place and a man will say to you, oh, I'm going to vote for you. I just love your hat. And I think, get out of here before you say something to change his mind, But it's been great. But I have to give credit to the people that worked with me and for me. I had such good help through all the different departments. I think about Steve in the roads department. I remember one night it was a terrible storm, and I think I called him at least 3 times to get him out of bed because there were road signs down or something or other. And he was as pleasant on the last phone call as he was on the first. And the office staff with particularly the last term, my problems with the computer, and they were always so good to help me with it. I have to tell you, the one they gave to me in Tavistock, I never had a bit of problem with it. and when,
That's the end of that.
And when I retired, they gave it to me. But anyhow, the only problem I would have with staff is the fact that they did so much for me with my computer. And now when I get into problems, what do I do? They're not around to help me. But no, it was a wonderful experience. As I've said so many times, if I could live my life over again, that piece would always be there. I would gladly do it again. It has been a time of learning and experience and meeting people and going places, even in Zorra, that I never would have gone to if it hadn't been that I was on council. So I am the beneficiary of all this, and I can only say thank you for the opportunity you gave me.
You know how this goes. No. So, moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that bylaw 27-32 being a bylaw to confirm, oh, sorry, I need somebody else. Finch. And that one too. Moved by Grigg, seconded by Finch, that bylaw 27-23 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held May 3rd, 2023 be read a first, second, and third time this May 3rd, 2023, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And let me tell you, feels really weird doing this with you sitting there right beside me. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Grigg, that this session of council be now adjourned and herewith closed at 12:12 p.m. And the next meeting of council be called for the May 17th, 2023 at 6 p.m. in the council chambers of the Township Municipal Office. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried.